There's a particular silence that lives inside museums after midnight. Heavy, expensive, the kind of silence that costs admission. I breathe it in every night as I polish glass, careful not to look too long at my own reflection in the display cases. My name's Miles Vargas, third shift custodian at the Hollow Vale Museum of Occult Artifacts, which is a long way to say janitor with a key ring he doesn't understand. The job's easy money, no tourists, no chatter, just floor wax and the tick of the motion sensors. I signed the contract 3 months ago when the grocery warehouse cut staff again. The only rule my supervisor emphasized, more than payroll, more than safety drills, was this: never touch what is already dusty. Back then it sounded poetic, like something you'd read on a poster about mindfulness. Tonight it sounds closer to a warning that came too late. Every case glows faint blue in the emergency lights. Relics from 100 superstitions stare through the glass. Dolls stitched from human hair, brass mirrors hooded under velvet, a clock that won't tick yet never stops changing time zones. I swipe my rag across the exhibit sign for the unresting wing, and the word resting exhales a thin puff of dust, as if it just woke up. 3 months earlier, before I learned what wakes inside the glass, I'd met Director Clarence Boyd in his office, a cathedral of paperwork and temperature-controlled air. He looked like he'd been mummified in starch decades ago and only recently thawed out. His handshake was too cold for June. "We're a small operation," he said, smiling with the polish of someone who rarely practices it. "Cleaning is delicate in a collection like ours. Dust keeps history intact. Remove too much, you erase something that can't be replaced." Then came that same phrase he'd later engrave into my nightmares: never touch what's already dusty. He handed me a laminated badge, a skeleton key, and a stack of waivers telling me exactly who wasn't liable if anything went wrong. The pay rate nearly doubled my old job's, so I nodded before finishing the fine print. The tour began in daylight. Velvet ropes, scent of lemon polish, air thick with climate control hum. Boyd moved wordlessly from case to case, as if every relic occupied its own fragile orbit. A sailor's locket glinting with stale seawater inside. The widow's mask carved from bone and impossible grief. A gilded mirror covered by onyx cloth. "Authenticity has no correlation with danger," Boyd murmured when I asked which items were real. "Fakes attract the same attention, you'll see." At the security room, he pointed to the monitors. "Cameras never turn off, they deter vandals." Every screen displayed identical timestamps, frozen at 3:17 a.m. "They'll adjust once you start your first night," he added, before ushering me out with a brochure-thin smile. "No other staff after 9. Lights are automatic. You'll work alone." I remember thinking that solitude sounded like peace. If I'd looked closer at the reflections swimming in those screens, I might have noticed the movement behind me, the faint tilt of something inside the glass, already watching its new janitor arrive. On my first official night, the museum felt smaller, like the darkness squeezed the corridors closer together. The overhead lights clicked on in neat rows, casting long reflections across the marble floors that followed a beat behind my footsteps. I'd never known how loud a mop could sound until that night. Routine steadied me. Vacuum, wipe, sweep, repeat. The air conditioning hummed steadily. The security cameras blinked tiny green heartbeats above each door. Safe, predictable, at least for the first hour. I noticed it near the Egyptian gallery. A velvet rope I'd coiled after inspection was unlatched again, drooping into the walking lane. I replayed the motion in my head. Had I forgotten? I clipped it back, shrugged, kept moving. 15 minutes later, I returned for the vacuum cord I'd left plugged in. The rope was down again, same lazy arc across the floor. 2 scuffs appeared in the dust just beyond it. One the size of my boot, the other too small for a grown man, but too deep for a child. The dirt glittered faintly, like iron filings catching light. "Settling foundation," I muttered carefully, as though the walls might overhear. I climbed the stairs to the upper mezzanine, the most modern of the wings, glass and brass instead of stone and marble. Up there rested the widow's mask.
Behind the glass, its hollow eye sockets seemed to follow the corridor bend. I told myself perspective does funny things. Still, each time I passed, the mask angled slightly differently, chin tilting as if curious. By 3 a.m., I'd convinced myself exhaustion played tricks. I wheeled the mop bucket back to the supply closet and caught a flicker in the glass case's reflection. A second figure half a pace behind me, pushing its own mop in perfect rhythm. When I turned, hall empty, reflection gone. Somewhere in the building, I heard a soft click of glass closing. I told the silence, mostly to keep breathing, first nights always mess with you. But the voice that echoed back from the hallway used my exact intonation. By the second week, the routine felt brittle, as if one careless movement would crack it open. Each night began with the same checklist: turn on corridor lights, sign the logbook, scan item numbers for visible damage. I liked the ritual. It made the strangeness measurable. Until the night numbers started lying. Tag 113, Sailor's Locket, looked normal behind the glass. Oxidized brass, tiny portrait sealed inside with splash stains that would never dry. But on the clipboard inventory, column B read, missing. Destroyed in flood 1979. Boyd's initials signed beside it. I blinked, reread, looked up at the locket still gleaming under its spotlight, gently spinning on its chain like it breathed. Tag 114 had a barcode but no description, just the words exhibit redacted. When I typed the ID into the CCTV database, footage stuttered. Every camera in the unresting wing jumped back 30 seconds, then forward again. The missing half-minute repeated twice more before freezing on a single still frame. Me staring towards something off-camera, expression blank like sleepwalking. Then the system booted me to the timestamp log. 2:0300 a.m. Skipped entirely. Every night had the same deletion. I checked the breakers, the backup generator, anything physical to blame. Found nothing. When I crouched to tie a shoelace, glass in the corner case emitted a faint tick, quick and sharp as knuckle on bone. One object after another answered, soft chimes cascading through the hall until silence returned like an exhale. I whispered, someone's prank, not believing it even a little. The next morning, I re-watched the surveillance file. Whatever moved inside the cases was subtle, objects leaning toward the lens a fraction closer than the night before. The widow's mask had turned enough to reveal that its inward curve wasn't hollow after all, but filled with a soft black sheen like cooling tar. That afternoon, I asked maintenance if vibrations from outside construction could shake the displays. They shrugged. No crews worked that late, and besides, one said, lowering his voice, you'd hear the footsteps before any rattling. Footsteps, I realized, were the only sound I hadn't heard yet, and I had a growing suspicion the silence was saving them for the right moment. After that shift, I clocked out, shaking, caffeine-wired, and starved for answers. I told myself daylight would shrink the paranoia, the way sunlight shrinks frost. It didn't. Curiosity just learned how to walk on caffeine legs. The front desk attendant, Lena, covered mornings. She was the kind of person whose cheerfulness felt like armor. When I mentioned the missing footage, she hesitated long enough for truth to show before the practiced grin returned. Old cameras, she said. Half of them are dummies anyway. They flicker at 2:03 every night. That's not random. She tapped her nails on the counter, thinking, then lowered her voice. You've heard of the unresting wing, right? I nodded. It wasn't supposed to be part of the tour. Those pieces weren't donations, they were recoveries. Private collectors, crime scenes, failed exorcisms, things people wanted gone but weren't brave enough to destroy. Her face softened. My sister used to clean that wing. She said you can tell which objects are genuine because they breathe. The glass fogs every so often, like they're sighing. I asked what happened to her sister. She quit, Lena lied too fast. Then, quietly, or Boyd says she did. Around us, the hum of fluorescence grew louder, carrying a faint rhythmic pulse, almost a heartbeat repeating beneath the noise. Lena's eyes darted toward the ceiling.
Don't talk about it upstairs. The vents carry sound. She slid a folded brochure across the counter. Page 12, Museum Founder's Portrait. You'll want to see the background. On my break, I read it. Just behind the founder stood a glass case, identical to the widow's mask display. But the plaque beneath it bore a name I'd never seen in the registry. Custodian 0, returned to storage, 1949. Later that night, when the corridor chilled at 2:03, I caught my reflection in the glass. For one lost second, I swear I looked exactly like her photograph. I told myself I was going back to work, but really I was going back to witness. Something in me had shifted, from employee to archaeologist of the impossible. The lights flickered alive at 11 p.m. sharp. The usual clean humidity of the air was missing. The place smelled like an electrical storm about to break. I'd taken every safety precaution known to janitors: keys on one ring, flashlight in my breast pocket, rubber gloves like armor. The corridors glowed a soft, wrong blue. My reflection dragged half a second behind in every case I passed. Hoping to drown the tension, I began to whistle one of those songs you only half remember from childhood. The tune bounced off marble, returned out of rhythm, one beat too late. In the unresting wing, the objects had repositioned themselves with delicate precision. The sailor's locket now hung centered on its hook instead of tilting left. Case 217, the widow's mask, was facing backward, veil staring into a wall. Beneath the pedestal glass, a hairline crack shaped like a crescent had formed since last night. I bent to check it. The crack spread beneath my gaze in complete silence, branching like veins. Then the air tightened. The song I had whistled began again, originating from somewhere deeper in the wing, a high, cold echo imitating me perfectly. I killed my breath, listening. The echo kept going, one final note longer than mine had lasted. On the control monitors upstairs, static crawled across every feed like snow. Between those gray sparks, a pattern emerged. Different camera angles merged into a single moving panorama, a corridor spinning in slow coil. Tiny black shapes, the artifacts themselves, crept one frame closer to the lens each refresh. The widow's mask turned again, now facing the security door. In the glass reflection of the screen, I thought I saw the faint impression of a human spine pressed outward from the inside of the case, vertebrae glowing white under glass. I shut the power strip off, intent on ending the hallucination. But even in darkness, light persisted, a soft phosphorescent line tracing along the floor tiles leading exactly to where the 203 gap would begin. I pretended I didn't see it. Pretending, though, has never once stopped the museum from seeing me. By morning, the museum looked too innocent in sunlight, the kind of cleanliness that feels rehearsed. I nearly convinced myself nothing had happened until I parked my cart in the central corridor and saw a piece of paper lodged beneath the front wheel, a torn museum admission stub, one of ours. Across the back, written in smudged graphite, were 5 words: "Dust is memory, stop erasing us." The writing was familiar, compact, slightly left slanted, the same lettering I used to mark supply checklists. For a moment, I actually checked my pockets, half expecting to find the same pencil. Water dripped from above and splashed the note clean, blotting the letters into gray veins. When I looked for a leak, the ceiling tiles were perfectly dry. I fetched my mop over anyway. When the strands touched the puddle, cold surged up the handle, stinging my palms. The wet spot spread against gravity, climbing, patterning itself into numbers, 601. Then, just as suddenly, the water vanished, no residue, no stain. That afternoon, I tried confronting Boyd. I found him cataloging papers in the administrative wing, surrounded by antlers, pinned butterflies, and fossils that appeared to pulse faintly. He didn't flinch when I mentioned the note, only smiled that gentle museum donor smile. Records mix up all the time, Miles. Exhibits want attention. You're giving them too much. I pressed harder. What does 601 mean? It means you've been working too many doubles, he answered. Then his gaze drifted past me, toward the glass door where sunlight bled through in red streaks. Clean carefully, Mr. Vargas. Some layers protect us from seeing more than we should. He returned to his files. The room's other reflections, desk lamp, paperweight, my own outline, failed to move in sync with us. When I stepped back into the hallway, the security monitor over the stairwell flicked from black to an image of my mop bucket, alone in the gallery, water inside trembling as if something just dove beneath the surface. I went back that evening anyway. Curiosity is a drug with the worst hangover. Boyd found me in the supply corridor, running the mop through water that refused to stay still. "You're early," he said, smile tight. In full light, his skin looked powdered with fine gray dust. I realized it wasn't dust at all, it was ash. "You didn't answer me this morning," I said, "about 6:01. He straightened the cuffs of his immaculate suit. "Clock problems, power fluctuations." "Then why do the lights breathe?" I asked before I could stop myself. His pupils flared. For a second, I thought I saw motion behind them, tiny reflections turning like gears. "I thought you were hired to clean, not interpret," he said. "But since you're so interested, I'll tell you what matters. This collection needs order. Order keeps the doors open. Ignore whatever chaos your fatigue invents."
On his desk lay the same museum catalog I'd been issued, only his version was twice as thick and hand-annotated. Every page bore faint charcoal rubbings of symbols, circles hooked by tails like stylized sixes. Wallpaper behind him repeated the same pattern, invisible until I noticed. When he closed the book, the sound wasn't paper, it was glass sliding over glass. "We all see ghosts of ourselves here," he continued mildly. "Don't let yours touch anything valuable." I left without replying. As I turned down the stairwell, a shadow detached from his wall and walked the other way. I didn't stay to watch whose face it was wearing. By the time I reached the gallery floor, the note in my pocket had rewritten itself. Same handwriting, new line. "He wants them awake." That night, the automatic doors refused to seal behind me. They stayed half open, like a mouth paused on the verge of a word. Beyond them, the museum pulsed faint red, emergency lights cycling though no alarm sounded. The air smelled of coin metal and rain far away. I pushed my cart to the unresting wing, and every wheel squeaked in perfect rhythm, a funeral march tempo I couldn't stop matching. The phrase on the rewritten note thrummed in my head: "He wants them awake." At 2:01 a.m., the fluorescence blinked out. Crimson backup strips came alive along the floor like the inside of a throat. The glass cases fogged simultaneously. Through the condensation, shapes twitched, rotations of wrist bones and porcelain faces straining to turn toward one another. I froze. Cameras overhead whined, lenses grinding as though they were breathing through static. On the nearest screen, my reflection watched from 2 steps behind, moving a fraction late. Then, in real air, a scrape, glass shifting gently against stainless steel. I backed away, fumbling for keys that had melted into fine black powder at the bottom of my pocket. I could smell heat, but felt nothing. Every relic in the corridor began pivoting in unison, aligning their sightless faces toward the same hallway, the path that led to the sealed, unresting wing. The sound was minute, an orchestra of small clicks, hinges learning how to pray. My mop handle lifted from its bucket and balanced upright on its own, droplets rising up the shaft instead of falling. I pulled the breaker with shaking hands. No effect. The glow only deepened, throbbing like a heartbeat. 2:03 approached on my watch, but the second hand slowed, refusing to arrive. Behind me, a voice whispered, "Almost morning." When I turned, the widow's mask pressed against its glass from the inside, fissures spiderwebbing outward like frost. The black surface pulsed, once, twice, answering the rhythm of my heart exactly. By dawn, I was sitting in my car with shaking hands and the taste of copper behind my teeth. I hadn't called the police, didn't even know what I would report. Haunted inventory misalignment? They'd laugh me straight into committed leave. Instead, I drove back to the front lobby just before opening and found Lena unpacking brochures. Her smile faltered the moment she saw me. "You saw them, didn't you?" It wasn't really a question. I nodded. "Explain them." She looked around.
The only other presence was the gift shop mannequin staring blindly at postcards, then slipped a rolled blueprint from beneath the counter. "All buildings keep copies of their electrical plans," she whispered, "except this one. These were hidden in maintenance archives labeled obsolete. Look at the bottom floor." The page unfurled across the desk, a rough square labeled Collection 0, Private Storage. A staircase diagram led downward, beneath the janitor's closet, beneath my closet. Someone had crossed it out in thick red marker and scrawled, "Sealed, 1951, no entry." "That's where the power surges start," Lena said. "Same coordinates every night. My sister, she worked this shift before you. She told me she could hear breathing through the vents. Then, one morning, we found her badge inside a display case, no glass broken." Her voice broke just enough to betray the lie of composure. I think she's there. And if those things keep moving, they want others to join her." She slid the map into my hands with a fierce nod. "Meet me here after close. We'll open that hatch before Boyd notices." A new rule carved itself quietly into the back of my head as she walked away. Never keep secrets from the building. Somehow, I was sure it could hear us planning under its breathless red lights, and it already knew what corridor we'd take to get there.
At midnight, the museum's air had the texture of damp fabric. Lena met me by the maintenance closet, a flashlight clutched tight enough to leave half moons on her fingers. The main halls slept in that false calm, motion sensors blinking green, security cameras humming like distant insects. She whispered, "If Boyd checks the monitors, we're fired." Fired's better than whatever's downstairs. The blueprint's red X marked a panel behind the mop rack. Together we pried it open. The drywall gave with a tired sigh. A spiral of iron steps descended into concrete dark. No dust, no cobwebs. Too clean. The air grew colder with every turn, tasting faintly of pennies. Lights blinked on automatically, one by one, guttural orange bulbs revealing hallways lined with display glass. Inside each case, instead of relics, were the stains of palms and a single pressed fingerprint, preserved like fossils in ice. Names were etched beneath, dates of employment, badge numbers, custodial titles. Lena stopped at one inscription and paled. Custodian 12, L. Ramos. Her gloved fingers trembled over the smear behind the glass. "Leah," she whispered. Her twin reflection in the pane whispered it back. We reached the central chamber, a circular room sunk beneath the building's foundations. In its center stood a podium wrapped in tarped velvet. Glass shards glittered around its base, as if something had broken free from the inside. I tugged the cloth back, despite every rule screaming no. A mirror gazed up from the pedestal, surface black as cooled ink. It didn't return my face, only the faint silhouettes of cases above, upside down, like another museum overhead. When Lena leaned closer, the reflection corrected itself, showing just her. Then her voice came from the mirror instead of next to me. "Don't move." I turned, she wasn't there, just the beam of her fallen flashlight shaking across empty glass. Inside the mirror, her outline struggled, palms flat to the surface as though trapped between distances. I reached out. The moment my finger touched the cold surface, the basement lights flickered. From above, every display case in the museum answered with a chorus of creaking hinges waking in unison. I yanked my hand back. For an instant, my fingertips burned black, the color of film negatives before they bleach out. The mirror trembled once, like something holding its breath. Then, just beneath the surface, outlines shifted. Rows of artifacts suspended in liquid dark, each one pulsing with a faint inner glow. Not reflections, duplicates. The sailor's locket, the widow's mask, even the mop bucket. Every object from upstairs existed again here, mirrored in perfect counterpoint, except that the doubles all moved, slowly, rhythmically, turning toward the trembling reflection of my hand. I understood the rule then.
Never touch what is already dusty. The dust wasn't neglect, it was containment. Every swipe of polish, every rag's shine was a tiny resurrection. I'd been scrubbing the locks off cages since my first shift. The glass around us hummed, as though catching a frequency no ear should. In the shattered reflection, I saw Lena, her face flattening into layers of expression, fear, awe, anger, all sliding across each other like film frames misaligned. Her mirrored self spoke without sound, words forming only on glass. Stop cleaning. From above, chains groaned. Something weighty shifted on the upper floors, an avalanche of cases repositioning, synchronizing. The entire museum was coming alive, matching the rhythm of the black mirror's heartbeat. A new phrase scrawled itself across the mirror, letters blistering into the silvering. The collection recreates its caretaker. For one dizzy moment, I saw the truth play out in hindsight. Boyd's gray dust skin, the photos of past custodians, the missing minute on every camera. Each cleaner had polished their own replacement into existence. The artifacts didn't consume, they copied. The mirror brightened until it painted the walls with light. My reflection stood apart from me, fully detached, rag in hand, face already void of surprise. It bent down, pressed the cloth to its own glass, and whispered through the shimmer, "Your turn." Every display upstairs answered back by opening its eyes. The sound coursed through the concrete like thunder trapped in stone. Every display above was echoing that one terrible hum. I hauled the tarp back over the mirror, hoping darkness might quiet it, but the cloth only swelled outward, caught in some unseen breath. Lena's reflection still struggled behind the surface, movements slowing as if she were sinking beneath black water. When I tried to pull her free, frost spread across the glass, sealing her silhouette mid-scream. My own reflection hovered beside hers, calm as a portrait. It nodded once at me. My radio buzzed, Boyd's voice crackling through static. "Mr. Vargas, I assume you've located the source?" He sounded pleased, almost relieved. "Now please restore order before sunrise." "Order?" I shouted. "What are you keeping down here?" "Not down," he corrected, "through. Maintenance requires consistency. Each steward learns that eventually." His signal cut. Upstairs, the museum's main speaker began piping in a faint orchestral waltz, the one that plays only during opening hours. Except tonight, it played backward. I looked at the clock on my wrist, 5:59 a.m. The hands were quivering. In the mirror's glow, I saw what was coming. Every artifact rotating, aligning its gaze with precision toward the basement hatch. Their movement wasn't chaotic. It was coordinated, mechanical, purposeful. 6 a.m. The world held its breath. Lena's voice leaked faintly through the frost. "Cover it before they walk." I stared at my polishing rag, the same cheap cotton I'd used on every case. My fingerprints glittered across it like tiny constellations. One more swipe would finish the bridge between reflections. If I left things untouched, entropy might stop the loop. But refusing to clean meant disobedience, and disobedience meant replacement.
6:01. Heat surged up through the floor. Every bulb burst, the air filled with fine gray ash, dust reclaiming its place. The mirror pulsed like a heart. I dropped the rag. It landed softly, edges curling as if grateful. The hum faltered. Artifacts froze mid-turn, strings cut. I stepped back, feeling the entire museum exhale. Dust rained down in lazy spirals, coating my skin until I shimmered the same dull gray as Boyd's. But the silence was whole again. The cases stayed still, the mirror dimmed. Upstairs, the door flung itself open to dawn. No alarms, no movement, just the smell of old air and glass cooling after fever. I climbed up alone, left the mop where it lay, and let the dust settle unchallenged. Some sins you don't clean, you preserve them.
When the morning shift clocked in, light slanted through the stained skylights, buttery and deceitful. From the lobby, everything looked ordinary. Exhibits in perfect position, air conditioners purring, no sign of the earthquake that had rolled through the dark an hour before. Security guards grumbled their hellos as I stood by the janitor's cart, still coated in fine gray ash. One joked that I finally looked like part of the collection. He didn't notice my smile didn't reach my eyes. Director Boyd arrived 15 minutes later, immaculate as ever. His shoes didn't leave prints in the powder the way mine did. He surveyed the halls, expression a curator's pride. "Marvelous," he murmured. "The pieces have settled. It seems you've restored balance after all." "You mean you got what you wanted?" I said. My voice sounded wrong, hollowed out, like it came through a vent. When he clasped my shoulder, it was oddly light, as if part of him were transparent. "This museum endures because caretakers know when to obey," he said. "You've finally learned not to overclean."
Caretakers know when to obey rattled around my skull like a dropped coin. Behind us, the display lights clicked on one by one. In the glass of the nearest case, I saw Boyd walking away, and myself, still standing motionless though my body followed. I turned back, heart pounding. My reflection lingered a second too long, then turned its head independently, eyes bright with something like pity. Its lips moved. "Your turn to keep them still." When I blinked, we matched again. Boyd's voice floated from the entrance. "I'll send maintenance to wipe down the floors. You get some rest." But rest was gone. As he left, I noticed a small plaque newly affixed beside the widow's mask. Custodian 13, M. Vargas. Active collection status, stabilized. I dropped my badge on the floor. It landed face down, already dusted over. In the security feed on the desk monitor, the mop I'd left in the basement stood upright, handle gently rocking as if stirred by breath. The time code at the corner glitched between two numbers, 6:59 and 6:01, never finishing the second. Before I turned the monitor off, a new line appeared at the bottom of the screen, typed by no one's hand. "Never touch what is already dusty." Then static swallowed it. I left the museum unlocked behind me, sunlight washing the marble in false purity. Dust floated in the beam like suspended stars, waiting for me to move so it could resettle around the vacancy I'd leave. If you ever find yourself alone among relics and one of them looks cleaner than it should be, don't reach for a cloth. There are things inside glass that only breathe when polished, and they will always, always want a new caretaker.